Hello everyone. Well, tonight I'm going to show you how to keep your infrastructure as code up to date using GitHub Copilot Agents and an all new experimental feature that's part of Visual Studio Code called prompt files. If you've been working in the engineering space for a while, you'll know the problem of tech debt and the challenge of keeping ahead of it. Well, GitHub Copilot Agents has a really powerful set of new features that you can use to keep on top of some of these repetitive tasks and of course some of the more advanced tasks. In this case, I'm going to use prompt files, which is this new feature in GitHub Copilot Agents and Visual Studio Code, to run a process which will go through my infrastructure as code files and update all the resource module versions to the latest versions, identifying any changes that might be necessary, and then allowing me to provide feedback and make recommendations to those changes. So the first thing we're going to look at is my Bicep file. So this is a Bicep file, could be Terraform, could be whatever your particular flavor of infrastructure as code is. But this is a Bicep file for deploying a multi-tier app. There's App Insights, there's Azure Monitor, there's virtual machines, virtual networks. There's a whole bunch of resources. Now I'm using something called Azure Verified Modules. Now these, if you're not familiar with these are basically template resource modules provided by Microsoft and the Azure Verified Modules team. And it encapsulates common and well-architected best practices into the modules to make writing your infrastructure as code simpler. But it also provides them as packages in the MCR, Microsoft Container Registry. And those are then versioned assets that you can refer to. It does simplify your infrastructure as code definitions, but it also means that you're more easily going to meet Microsoft best practices, especially if you're using well-architected framework and adopting those sorts of principles and practices, which of course you should be. But in this case, we'll take a look. Here I've got a module I'm using, let me see, we've got a storage account here that I'm deploying, and I'm using this AVM or Azure Verified Module. So this is a link to the module in the Azure Microsoft Container Registry, and I'm using 0.19.0. Now this module might or might not be out of date, but I will want to keep these up to date and keep them up to date regularly. But let's be honest, we don't do this very often. And even if we weren't using Azure Verified Modules, perhaps we're just using the API version numbers of the REST APIs, we probably don't keep these up to date either, but we should. It's tech debt. We've got to keep on top of it. It always comes back to bite us. So, but before we go into showing you how to remediate this, let's just take a quick run through of Azure Verified Modules so you're more familiar with what I'm talking about. So this is the Azure Verified Modules repository. If you want to get there, you can hit akms/avm, and that will take you to this particular site. And as you can see, we've got Bicep and Terraform. We're going to go to the resource modules for Bicep. And here is all of the resource modules. And I do swear they save you a lot of time, especially if you have to put diagnostic settings and private link. Usually you've got 5 or 6 resources just to do one thing. This will encapsulate it all and make it a lot simpler. I have all these resources, and each of them has a version number that is the current version. I can go through and say, perhaps if I go and look for Cosmos DB, because I know I'm using Cosmos, I can click through on this and go, and that will show me all of what the resource module, the AVM looks like, examples of how to use it, and of course this URL and the version number. So this is a really useful resource, and in fact, when I go through and manually update my AVMs, I have to go back to that original page, figure out what the current version is, click through into the actual documentation, determine if anything's changed. It's a lot of work. Couldn't an AI do that? Well, of course it could. So that's what I'm going to show you today. So the first thing you need to use, now I could go and just write a prompt and write it in agent mode in Visual Studio Code, and it would work just fine. But it is actually quite a long prompt to get this right, and it takes a lot of work. And wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to remember to type it all every time? I could just sort of store it and make it a template. Well, that is where prompt files comes in. So prompt files is a new feature. It's only available in Visual Studio Code right now. It is currently experimental. You can go and use it right now, though. There's a few things you have to get it set up. Firstly, you need obviously GitHub Copilot installed, the extension, the GitHub Copilot chat extension installed into Visual Studio Code. And you need to enable the experimental feature. But once you've done that, you can create .prompt.md files. And those files are your templates. So we're going to go take a look at exactly what that process looks like. So if I head over to Visual Studio Code, the first thing I'm going to need to do is make sure I've got the extensions installed, which of course, why wouldn't I? If I head to the Copilot extensions, I've got the GitHub Copilot and of course GitHub Copilot Chat. I'm using the pre-release version here. I tend to use all the pre-release stuff just to get an idea of what's coming up. And I'm using the Visual Studio Code Insiders version as well. You don't have to use that. This works just as well in the normal version. So once we've done that, the next thing we've got to do is we've got to open our settings. So if we type in prompt files in the search box, we will come to this chat prompt files. Now we need to enable that. So you can enable it for your user or for the entire workspace. Perhaps if you want your entire team or the repo to be using this feature. I have typically enabled it in the workspace as well. And I will tick that box there. That will enable me a few new settings. So the first thing it will enable me if I go into the panel for Visual Studio Code is new prompt file. So I can just select chat new prompt file. And when I do that, it will ask me, where do you want to put it? And I can have either prompt files for the repo, for the workspace. For example, if I had a prompt file that was very specific to the project I was working on, I might just put it there. But perhaps I have a common review or prompt I like to run across all my repositories. I might make it a user data prompt. But I'm going to make it a GitHub prompts. I could give it the name, let's say update Azure AVM module versions. And of course, it's going to go create that new prompt file here in the GitHub prompts folder. So as you can see there, great. But it's created that update AVM prompts, and it's given me the empty template. Now, I don't really want to use this one because I've already spent a lot of time crafting this prompt, and I will share a link to this in the video notes. So I'm going to get rid of this one and show you a little bit more detail about the one that I have actually created. So this one here is the update AVM modules in Bicep prompt. Let's make that a little bit smaller. As you can see, this is quite a long prompt. In this case, I've specified in the head matter I want to only execute this in agent mode. Now this will allow it to obviously make agentic calls, use tools, go backwards round and round and round to solve the problem, and especially attack the task list I've given it in the prompt. I can also give it a description, and this is really just helps me understand or helps other users what is this actually going to do. And I can select tools. Now these are MCP tools. So if I click the configure tools, it gives me all the MCP tools that I've got installed. Now I don't want all of them. I only want a few to be able to be used because really I only need to be able to change code, edit files. Fetch is really important. Fetch data from a web page, and various other things. Maybe run tasks, execute code in the terminal because we might want to lint to the Bicep after we've run it. But we can choose the tools we want. Remember, we don't want to choose every single tool in our toolbox, especially given there is a limit of, I can't remember, GitHub Copilot is 100 and something tools in one prompt because every tool you have in the prompt actually burns tokens. So we don't want to do that. So I've got 17 here, probably don't need all 17 of them. And as you can see, they're listed there. But this is where the real money is. So I first started with your goal is to update the Bicep file. And I've used this magic string here, which will actually select the currently selected file in my context to use the latest available versions of Azure Verified Module. But what I've done here is I've said you will perform these steps. Now this is the key. This will tell the GitHub Copilot Chat agent to work through the set of steps and to solve this particular problem, to do what I need it to do. And I spent a lot of time crafting this, and you should too. When you're building these sorts of approaches, you want to spend a lot of time thinking it through, is it explaining it to someone who's not ever done this before. But you're really telling the story of what would you do manually if you were doing this. So the first thing I'm going to do is get a list of verified modules used in a specific file and get the module names in the current version. So it's going to look through one way or another through that Bicep file and get the module names and version numbers. Then step through each of those and use the fetch tool. Now I didn't have to specify the fetch tool. It will usually figure it out, but I do tend to find that if I'm more explicit, it will work better. Use the fetch tool to go and get the tags list from the MCR, Microsoft Container Registry. And I've given an example here. Examples work really well with these sorts of agents. The reason why I'm telling it to do this is because otherwise it might start searching all over the internet and come up with various different ways. Now it might get there in the end, but it'll be slower, or it might not get there at all. And if I know what the process is, it'll always do a better job. So I'm telling it, go and run, fetch this URL, and the URL is different depending on the resource, but I've given an example and it can infer what it needs to do. And I've used markdown format URLs, which is always a good practice in these sorts of things. And I've said, find the latest version tag. Now there's a key, something I found with the version tag detection is the version tags, if we actually call one of these URLs, this one might show it, we'll see. If we run that URL, we will see that the latest version is actually all the way down here, 0.15. It is not 0.90. Now, if we don't, sometimes the model will just figure this out and look up and say, oh, it's 0.15 is the latest one. Sometimes it just goes to the bottom and says that's the latest one. So we've actually got to give it, be more explicit with what we're doing. If we're more explicit, we'll get a better result. So I do have a important section, which I like to always include. It gives it sort of real special guidance. Pay attention to this. So do not find the latest version of an Azure Verified Module by any other reason. And the tags list returned from the Microsoft Containers Array JSON string, so it is not in version order. You will need to pass the tags and find the latest version based on the semantic versioning scheme. So pretty clear. Those are really important. And I'm putting a # important, making it a heading, putting it at the bottom, which will ensure that the model, the agent, will pick it up more reliably. And it's non-deterministic. Sometimes it's not perfect, but worst case scenario, you run it again. But if it's going to say, if the next step is if there is a newer version of the module available based on the tags, you need to then use the fetch tool again and fetch the documentation for the appropriate model. Again, I've used the example, but the documentation is in the Git repo. So you can find the Git repo. Luckily, the AVM team have laid it out very clearly. You can infer the location of the documentation based on the resource name or the resource type. So the compute/virtual machine, and we can walk through to the compute virtual machine as well. Okay, so once we've done that, we need you to compare the documentation for the module to the current usage in the Bicep file and identify any changes that need to be made to the module parameters or usage. Now this is really important because yes, the module, I mean, we might be updating the module version number, but we want to know if there are actually any other changes that might impact the module. Now I've put an important call out. I could have thrown that down the important there, but I wanted to keep it in line. It's another way of showing you how you can make important call outs to the model. So if the changes to the module parameters are not compatible with the current usage, are new changes that would change the behavior are related to the security or compliance, then these changes must be reviewed and approved before being applied. So pause and ask the user for input before proceeding. So this will actually stop. So the model will stop, the agent will stop and ask for, it usually will ask for input before proceeding. We might refine this by giving a few examples. It's a bit hit and miss, but worst case, it's always going to show us what the changes are. It's not like it's going to commit it to the repo and push to production. So of course, we're reviewing anyway. And then finally, make the updates to the document, to the bicep file. And then finally, final step, if there are no changes to the module, just leave it alone. Don't touch it, right? Not that it's going to probably touch it, but just be clear. Always be explicit. Prompt engineering is about making no assumptions and being as explicit as possible. But that obviously means a lot of writing. So that's why these templates are so useful, because you don't have to write a lot. You can get them right, build the process, store it and share it with all your teams, all your products, all your repos once it's right. And it's now about just as much about writing the process as it is about writing the code itself. This frees out you to A, tackle tech debt, which is a big problem, and B, focus on the really difficult stuff. Updating versions of infrastructure as code or even just package versions aside isn't high value work. So let's try it. Let's get it set up. So the first thing we need to do, and we'll scroll this out and get that out of the way. First thing we need to do is make sure we have opened our bicep file. Now I've got the bicep file in context. I've clicked it to activate it in context. Now I can select different models. I have found that GPT-4.1 works really well. Claude Sonnet 4 and Gemini 2.5 Pro work really well. O4 Mini not so much, because it is a reasoning model. It's for a slightly different purpose. You need a really good instruction following model. The other thing I've found, although I have set all the tools in the prompt, I've said these are the tools you can use and that are needed for this process, you actually need to make sure that you've configured all your tools here and you've turned everything on. Now I have found that it seems to be if you're missing a tool that's not active in here, but it is required by the agent in the prompt file, it's specified in the prompt file, it sort of just stopped. It doesn't really, it says it's thinking, but it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. Now again, this is an experimental feature, so I'm sure this will get improved over time. So let's kick it off. So the first thing we could do, once we've activated prompt files and we've got one, we can press / and it will give us the appropriate, the prompt files I've defined. So this is the one I've got, update AVM modules in Bicep. And because I've already selected this, I could, in prompt files actually supports the ability to put input files and selected text and all sorts of stuff. So you can actually, and input variables. So you can actually have a whole lot of parameters that you can pass in. But in this case, I don't need to. It's just operating on a selected file. And I can specify that the prompt file actions either agent, edit, or ask mode, or all three. I think you can actually specify multiple. But in this case, it's going to force agent mode. Even if I wasn't in agent mode, it would flip to agent mode to run this. So let's kick it off. So we're going to zoom in a bit and see what's going on. So this is the process. It starts working, and as you can see, it's got our context there specified as the main, and it's told us that the prompt it's using. I'll make that a bit bigger for you. And we get rid of this as well. And as you can see, it's already figured out that started making these fetches. It's identified all of the resource modules that were in the in my Bicep file. It has then gone and fetched the actual list, tags list. It's figured out some of them are new. Sometimes I get green ticks to know they're on, they're new, etc. Latest, there's a few that need to be updated in here. And now it's going through and it's pulling the documentation. Interesting, cool, for all the ones that need to be updated. So, and as you can see, now it's started to document no breaking changes, behavioral changes, just a minor fix there. It's gone through and it's basically told us that, and let's go down here, it's told us that it's made those changes. So what we can now do is, and I will actually say go ahead. So it's asking me for confirmation to make those changes. So I'm just going to say make the changes. So it's paused and waited for me to say go for it. So what it's now going to do is, you'll see it'll start to make the changes to this file, starting at the top. And we'll see that each resource is updated. Now, interestingly, pay attention to the Cosmos one, because that actually has some structural changes in it, but it has inferred, usually, I've not seen it not do this, infer the correct process to update. It's renamed, some of the parameters are changed, it's changed the name, it's changed the name for the authentication parameter. So it's still reading all the content of the Bicep file. Now it's starting to make it. So as you can see, it's said the module was updated, but there are some lint errors due to parameter changes in the new version. So this is what I was talking about. It's actually locations is no longer allowed, but failover locations is disable local auth and is changed to disable local authentication. So one of the other things I didn't mention is that in my prompt, I also said, ensure that the Bicep file is valid after the changes and that it adheres to the latest standards for AVM after linting errors. So I've actually told it to lint the file, which is fantastic, which is where it picks some of this stuff up. So as you can see, it's gone, disabled the local authentication, failover locations has been updated. It's updated each of these, and I can go through looking at them, checking that they look right. There's no squiggly underlines, which will tell me actually if there was a problem. So it's done a fantastic job, and it didn't take long. I gave it a bit of feedback and I'm good. So I can just keep all of those. And now I'm up to date. I can go and push these changes and we're good to go. That is really how simple these processes can be. And obviously, as the models get more capable, they will do a better job. And obviously, one of the most important things we can do is craft the correct prompts, put the correct guardrails in. If it gets it wrong one time, refine the prompt, and share it out. I expect many organizations will start to have these shared prompt repositories or prompt file repositories or templates that they include in all their products to help their teams keep ahead of tech debt. Because with more code being generated, more tech debt being generated, we need to get this stuff right. And this is where these issues, bugs, and security vulnerabilities fall in, is when we don't keep everything up to date. So hopefully that has been really, really useful, and it sort of inspires you to think, what could I automate with prompt files? What could I use this for? How could I make my life easier so I can focus on the really tough challenges, writing code? So with that, I'll thank you, and hopefully sign in, look up for the next one. Cheers.